The night Halkett showed up at her door, Milo was sitting on the kitchen floor with her back against the cabinet and a bag of frozen peas pressed to her right hand, trying to remember if she'd eaten anything that day that wasn't coffee. She hadn't. The knock came at 11:47 p.m. She knew because she'd been staring at the microwave clock for the past 20 minutes, watching the numbers change and thinking about nothing in particular, which was the only way her brain knew how to rest anymore. She didn't answer right away. People who knocked on doors in this building at this hour were either lost, drunk, or someone else's problem. Milo was good at being none of those things. The knock came again, 3 times, evenly spaced, patient in the way that suggested whoever was on the other side had all the time in the world and absolutely no intention of leaving. She pulled herself off the floor, dropped the peas in the sink, and looked through the peephole. The hallway light was bad. It was always bad. The super had been promising to fix it since October, but she could see him clearly enough. Tall, dark coat, the kind of stillness that didn't belong in a building like this. Halkett. Her stomach did something complicated. She'd worked for him for 14 months. She'd sat across from him in glass-walled conference rooms and read spreadsheets aloud while he stood at the window with his back to her, and she'd learned to tell his moods by the way he held his shoulders. She knew which columns he checked first and which numbers made his jaw tighten, and how long the silences lasted before he'd say, "That's fine, move on." She knew all of that, and she still couldn't say she knew him, because men like Halkett weren't meant to be known. They were meant to be navigated. She opened the door. He looked at her. She looked at him. Neither of them said anything for a moment that stretched just long enough to be uncomfortable. "You weren't answering your phone," he said. "It's midnight. It's 11:48. Milo leaned against the doorframe. She was wearing an oversized Portland State sweatshirt that had a small bleach stain on the left sleeve, and she was not wearing shoes. And her hair was still half-pinned from work 12 hours ago, the rest of it falling loose over one shoulder. She hadn't planned for this. There was no version of this evening where she'd planned for this. "How do you know where I live?" she asked. "You're on file. Most people don't visit their employees at midnight because they're on file." He didn't answer that. His eyes moved past her, into the apartment, a quick scan, the kind she recognized from the way he assessed any room he walked into, cataloging exits and vulnerabilities in the same breath. Whatever he saw, nothing in his face changed, but she watched his jaw do that thing. "Can I come in?" he said. It wasn't really a question. "No," she said, automatic, honest. Something shifted in his expression. Not offense. She didn't think Halkett did offense, not in the conventional sense, more like recalibration. He looked at her for another moment, then down at her right hand, which she'd forgotten about until exactly now. The knuckles were swollen. There was dried blood along the side of her index finger, where the skin had split, when she'd punched the wall in the stairwell at 6:15 that evening, right after the call from the collection agency that was chasing her mother's medical debt, right after she'd done the math for the 4th time and gotten the same answer. She pulled her hand back. "What happened to your hand?" he said. "I fell. You didn't fall. How do you know?" He looked at her. Just looked. Milo had sat across from men who used silence as a weapon her entire adult life. Her father, her last boss, every loan officer who'd ever slid paperwork across a desk at her, like she should be grateful, and she'd learned to wait them out. She was good at waiting, but there was something different about Halkett's silences. They didn't feel aggressive. They felt like him actually listening to everything she wasn't saying. It was worse, somehow. "The quarterly projections are wrong," he said finally. She blinked. "What?" "Meridian Group, the ones I sent you this afternoon. There's an error in the revenue offset columns. I sent those back at 3 p.m. I know. I'm saying there's an error." She stared at him, her brain, sluggish from no food and too much recycled anxiety, caught up slowly. "Which column?" 14 through 19. She pulled the door wider without really deciding to, and walked back into the apartment. He followed. She heard him close the door behind her. Her laptop was on the kitchen table, which was also where she kept her mail, and a library book she'd been 2/3 through, since February and the half-finished application for a part-time accounting position at a non-profit in Beaverton that paid $11 less per hour than she made now, but didn't require her to know the names of men who could have. People disappeared. She flipped the laptop open and pulled up the file. He stood behind her, not close, far enough to be deliberate about the distance, but she was aware of him in the specific way she was always aware of him, like a change in air pressure. She found the column. She ran her eyes down the figures. She saw the error in approximately 4 seconds. "That's not my error," she said. "I know." She turned around. He was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, watching her. His coat was still on. His expression was the same as it always was. Composed, careful, revealing nothing. "You drove here at midnight to tell me about an error that isn't mine," she said. "I drove here at midnight because I needed to know if you were all right." The apartment was very quiet. Somewhere 2 floors up, someone was watching television. The refrigerator hummed. Milo looked at him. She thought about the collection agency call, about the math, about the frozen peas and the kitchen floor and the 20 minutes of watching the microwave clock while her brain tried to find somewhere quiet to put itself. She thought about the 14 months of sitting across conference room tables from this man and handing him numbers that made sense of things that otherwise didn't, and the way he sometimes said good when she caught something he'd missed, and nothing else, but the way he said it made her feel like something had actually been recognized. She thought about what she knew about him. She thought about what she didn't. "I'm fine," she said. He didn't say anything. "I'm tired," she said, "and I haven't eaten, and I have a bruised hand that is not your business. But I'm fine." He pushed off the wall. She expected him to say something, to push back, to challenge the fine the way she'd have expected anyone else to. But he didn't. He walked to her refrigerator and opened it without asking. She should have been furious. She opened her mouth. He looked at the inside of the refrigerator for a moment. She knew what was in there. Half a jar of peanut butter, 2 eggs, a container of leftover rice she wasn't sure was still safe, and a bottle of sparkling water she'd bought because it was on sale and then realized she didn't like sparkling water. He closed the refrigerator. "Get your shoes," he said. "Excuse me. I'm not going to stand here and argue about whether you need to eat dinner at midnight, Milo. Get your shoes." Nobody talked to her that way. Not like it was reasonable. Not like it was simply the next logical step in a sequence of events that made obvious sense. She thought about refusing. She was good at refusing. It was one of the things she was best at. And then she thought about the rice in the fridge. She got her shoes. He took her to a place on the east side that was closed, technically, but the man at the door nodded at Halkett and let them in through the back. The kitchen was still warm. Someone brought out food without being asked. Bread and olive oil and then pasta with something that smelled so good she had to actively prevent herself from closing her eyes. She ate. He watched her eat. It should have been uncomfortable. She didn't have the energy left to be uncomfortable. "The error in the file," she said, between bites. "It was Cordell's. He ran the first pass, I know. Are you going to tell him?" "Already did." She looked up. "Tonight?" "On the way here." She set her fork down. "Halkett, what is actually happening right now?" He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. He had a scar on the back of his right hand. She'd noticed it months ago, a thin white line that curved from his knuckle to his wrist. She'd never asked. She'd catalogued it the way she catalogued everything about him. Quietly, without comment in a part of her brain she didn't examine too closely. "There's a board meeting Friday," he said. "The Renshaw deal has to close before that meeting. If it doesn't close, 3 of the 7 board members will move to push the Talcott proposal instead. I'm aware of that. The Talcott proposal eliminates your department." She'd known that too, in the vague way you knew things you didn't fully allow yourself to sit with. She picked her fork back up. "And Cordell's error," she started. "Cordell made the error because he's been cutting corners since February, because he's been told by at least 2 people with more authority than common sense that the Talcott proposal is going to pass, and his job is safe either way." He paused. He was wrong about that. So were they. Milo looked at him. Are you telling me the Renshaw deal is going to close? I'm telling you it's already closed. Finalized this afternoon. That's 3 days earlier than. Yes. And you drove to my apartment at midnight to tell me this because I needed to know if you were all right, he said, the same words, the same even tone. And because I knew you wouldn't answer my call. She hadn't actually checked her phone since 5 p.m. She reached for it now, out of something close to reflex. 4 missed calls from an unknown number she didn't recognize, and 1 from the main office line, and 1 from a number saved under Halkett. Work that she'd added to her contacts in month 2, and never called and never expected to receive a call from. She put the phone down. My mother's in debt, she said. She didn't know why she said it. It came out in the same practical tone she used for everything, numbers and facts and what things cost. Medical debt, a lot of it. It's in collections now. I've been trying to work out a structure that makes sense for 2 years and it keeps not making sense. And today I got a call that the agency is moving to judgment, which means they can garnish wages. And she stopped, looked at the table. The wall in the stairwell is fine. I checked it after. The silence had a different quality now. She'd never said that much to him at once about anything that wasn't work. She looked up. He was watching her with that careful, deliberate attention that she couldn't quite read, that she'd spent 14 months trying to read and still couldn't entirely, and his expression hadn't changed, but something behind it had. How much? He said. That's not. How much, Milo? She told him. She said it the way she said every number, flat and factual, because numbers didn't mean anything more than what they were. The sum was substantial enough that saying it out loud in a warm restaurant at midnight felt vaguely absurd, like describing a wound. He didn't react. He didn't flinch or furrow or do any of the things people usually did when she said the number. He just absorbed it. I'll have someone contact the agency on Monday, he said. No, it's manageable. It's not your debt. That's not what I said. She set her fork down again. She looked at him carefully. This was the thing about Halkett. This was the thing she'd been circling for months. Without ever letting herself get too close to it, he operated in transactions. Everything was a ledger. Everything was owed and owing and accounted for. She'd understood that from the beginning, and she'd made her peace with it because she operated the same way. Because that was how you survived when you'd grown up the way. She'd grown up, counting what was in the refrigerator, and what was in the bank, and how many days until the next paycheck. But he was looking at her like this wasn't a transaction. What do you want from me? She said. He was quiet for a moment. Nothing you aren't willing to give, he said. That's not an answer. It's the only honest one I have. She looked at him for a long time. The restaurant was empty around them, just the hum of the kitchen and the low sound of someone washing dishes in the back, and the city outside doing whatever cities did at midnight, when most people were asleep. She thought about the spreadsheets, the conference rooms, the way he said good and nothing else, and she felt it land. She thought about his fiancée, the woman she'd seen twice in the office lobby, sleek and certain, and clearly from a world where the refrigerator was always full. The engagement had been announced in January. The wedding, she'd overheard, was in April. You're getting married in 4 months, she said. Something crossed his face. Not guilt, it wasn't guilt. Or if it wasn't simple enough to be called that. More like a man who had looked at 2 roads and known for a long time which one he wasn't supposed to take. The engagement ended this morning, he said. She stared at him. We made the announcement together. It was mutual. He paused. It was not actually mutual. Halkett, she told me in August that I was incapable of being present for another person, he said. She wasn't wrong. I was present for everything else and not for her, and I knew it, and I kept thinking I would learn how to fix it. He looked down at his coffee. I didn't fix it. I just kept going. The restaurant was very quiet. Milo thought about incapable of being present. She thought about the man who had driven to her apartment at midnight because he needed to know if she was all right. She thought about those 2 things at the same time and didn't know what to do with them. Why didn't you fix it? She said. Not accusing, actually asking. He looked up. His eyes were very steady. She had always thought his eyes were the most honest thing about him, that whatever else he controlled or calculated or kept locked away, his eyes just told the truth without seeming to mean to. "Because I was spending all my attention somewhere else," he said. She understood him. She was not naive enough to think she didn't understand him. She looked down at her hand on the table, the swollen knuckles, the split skin along her index finger that had darkened now to a bruise. She thought about all the things she'd been good at, the numbers, the waiting, the keeping her distance, the not wanting things she couldn't afford to want. She'd gotten very good at all of it. It had cost her something she hadn't had a name for and had just called fine because there was no other word available. She was very tired of fine. "I don't have room for complications," she said. "My life is—" She stopped, started again. "I'm managing a lot of things. I can't afford to be wrong about this." "I know what you're managing," he said. "I know what it costs you. I've been watching you manage it for 14 months. He turned his coffee cup in his hands. "I'm not asking you to trust me because you should. I'm asking you to trust me because I'd rather be honest about what I am than watch you keep treating yourself like you're not worth the risk." Milo looked at him for a long time. Outside, a car went past. The refrigerator in the kitchen clicked. The dishwasher in the back shut off, and for a moment there was nothing but the particular quality of late-night silence that felt less like quiet and more like the world holding its breath. She thought about the math. She always thought about the math, but she was beginning to suspect that some things didn't reduce to clean numbers, and that the attempt to make them do so was its own kind of error. "You can contact the agency Monday," she said, "but I pay it back, every dollar, on a schedule we agree on." He looked at her. Something in his face went very still. "That's acceptable," he said, "and I need to go home now because I have work tomorrow, and I haven't slept properly in 6 days, and I'm not going to make any other decisions tonight. I'll drive you. I know you will." She stood up. He stood up. She reached for her jacket, and he held it for her, not making a thing of it, just doing it, the way he did everything, like it was simply what came next. She put her arms through, and his hands settled for one moment on her shoulders, brief and deliberate, and then he stepped back. They walked out through the kitchen, past the warm ovens and the clean counters and the man washing the last of the pans who didn't look up. The night outside was cold, the kind of cold that came off the river and settled into the streets in November, and she could see her breath. He unlocked the car. She got in. He drove, and she watched the city go by in the dark, the lit windows and the wet pavement and the bridges strung with lights over the water, and she didn't say anything, and neither did he. When he pulled up in front of her building, he didn't turn the engine off. She sat for a moment with her hand on the door handle. She thought about the kitchen floor, the frozen peas, the microwave clock at 11:27, with nothing ahead of it but more of the same. She thought about what he'd said. Somewhere else. The way he'd said it like it wasn't a confession but a fact that had simply, finally, been stated out loud. "The columns were right," she said. "The original file. My numbers were right. I know," he said. "They always are." She looked at him. He was watching her in that steady way, one hand resting loose on the steering wheel, not pushing, not performing patience, just actually being it. Like he had been, she realized, all along. In the conference rooms and the silences and the single word good that she'd filed away in a part of herself she didn't let herself examine. She'd been examining the wrong thing, maybe. She opened the door. "Good night, Holkert," she said. "Good night, Milo." She got out. She walked to the front door of her building without looking back, and she didn't have to look back to know that he didn't pull away until she was inside. She heard the engine idling, steady and quiet, until the lobby door closed behind her. She stood in the entrance for a moment in the bad light, the one the super kept promising to fix. Her hand still ached. She was still tired. The math on her mother's debt hadn't changed, but something else had shifted, just slightly, like a column that had been carrying weight it wasn't meant to carry, and had finally been moved to where it belonged. She took the stairs.